What's up, everybody? Listen, first of all, apologies for this video about the Red Bull RB14 being late. The car was released, obviously, as everyone knows now, yesterday on Monday. Today is now Tuesday. The reason it's late is that Claire and I, my wife and I, have come away for 3 days, a 3-day mini break in a beautiful hotel, beautiful surroundings, no kids, no dog, no work. And yet here we are with all the Formula One cars being launched this week. So it's taken me a while to convince my wife that I need to get these videos done and uploaded whilst taking a little break from our mini break together. So if you like the video, at the end, please do drop her a message to say thank you because it will be much appreciated and will probably do me a little favour as well. Anyway, let's get into it. Excuse the croaky voice as well. I don't know where that's come from, but we'll get around that. Here it is then, the RB14. I'm sure everyone's seen it across the internet by now. Did a few laps around Silverstone in the hands of Daniel Ricciardo yesterday in the wet. As I understand, it no longer looks exactly like that anymore because Daniel had a little minor incident where he pranged it and I believe damaged the front wing and nose cone. So it won't be the end of the world, but certainly not the ideal start to a brand new car's launch day. Anyway, this is very much an evolution of what's come before from Red Bull. Lots of ideas on it have evolved from what was on the car last year, as opposed to being utterly revolutionary. We'll go through some of them. The open tip nose cone is one of the things that we've seen before on the Red Bull, something that they pioneered, I guess, in the past. And really that is about cleaning up the airflow going through and underneath the nose cone. If you have a rounded tip, as most of the teams do here, with a vent that allows driver cooling to go through, even though you've got that rounded tip, it causes turbulence and causes a buffer for the airflow that they really want to get past underneath the nose cone through these two sort of wing pillar mounts here and channeled through the centre section and fed out through the underside of the car and off towards the barge boards and through to the rear. So if you have an open tip nose like this, it just allows that stream of airflow to be much cleaner and much faster going through towards the rear. That's why they do it. They've obviously found some gains with it in the previous year and so have stuck with the concept this year. Moving further back, the front wing, as I said, we're not worried too much about because it will change. The nose cone as well, very, very similar camera mount positions at the front of there that they've had before. You can't see it in this picture, but there is an S-duct as most of the teams are now running. If we swap the picture around, you can just see here, I know it's not particularly clear on this picture that I'm pointing at, but I'll overlay the real picture on top. The S-duct just exits in the middle of the number 3 there, as we said before, picking up airflow from underneath the nose cone, passing through an S-duct and out through the top here, just to keep that airflow attached to the top of the chassis as it moves back towards the halo and the driver. One of the really interesting things, and perhaps unique as far as I'm aware on this car, is the position and the shaping of the front wishbones, particularly the top wishbone. Very, very high mounting on the chassis. There's a fairing panel that's inset inside the top of the chassis there, just to provide an aero fairing that comes out of the chassis onto the wishbone. But what's interesting is that the flexure point, i.e. the point on the wishbone that actually flexes as the suspension moves up and down, is further outboard here. And what they've done is they've put that further outboard so they can raise this up higher, but actually have before the wishbone takes its shape and sweeps backwards towards the upright where it needs to attach at the outboard end, that position where that sweep begins is further outboard than we normally see. And again, with the rear one, not super clear on this particular picture, but it's also a very swept, there's an angle in that wishbone. And that's all about cleaning up the airflow that runs through this. The suspension on a Formula One car is quite a turbulent area. And if you can clean that up and control it to where you want it as it passes through towards the barge boards, you have much more control over where that airflow is going. And as we move back towards the side pods in a moment, I'll talk about exactly why that's so important, particularly on this car. So that's quite interesting. Be interested to see how that works and how it potentially develops over the course of the season. But that's got Adrian Newey written all over it. Even the mechanical suspension components of these cars is still all centred around aero. And that is where Adrian Newey is absolutely paramount. It has to centre around aero. A pitot tube on top. This, I believe, is some kind of camera maybe a 360 camera or something that's mounted on here. Not something that I guess is necessarily going to be there for racing, but it's definitely looks like a camera mount on there. Moving back, we've got the halo, of course. Love it or hate it, it's here to stay. Wind mirrors, which are up on little stalks and then protruding wider, as we've seen on the Williams, for example, or the Haas, just to get around the vision problems that you have with a halo. The barge board area is very much an evolution of what they had last year. So this is not like the Mercedes solutions we've seen in the past, not got lots of little dagger boards like we've seen along here, but a much taller, I think it's two or three pronged, vertical prongs along that barge board, all sort of driving air towards these side pods and trying to clean up the airflow that's coming off this turbulent tyre wake. I talked before about how disruptive the front tyres are to the airflow on a Formula One car, the airflow structures. So once it comes off these, because you can't do much about that, you then have to get it back under control, clean it up, and that's what these sections around here are all about doing. These vertical planes here, which again are something that we haven't seen necessarily to this extent on the other cars yet, are about protecting the side pod inlets from this turbulent wake from the front tyre and cleaning it up to send it around the sides of the side pods again and off towards the diffuser. Now I'm just going to change the picture again, because one of the unique things or different things about this car, and this shows it slightly better, is the side pod area. It's a very darkened picture again, like we talked about before. They darken up these areas to try and protect them from other teams seeing what they've got. But what you can see when the picture's lightened is a very, very small, narrow air intake on those side pods. Very, very high up. Again, all stemming from what Ferrari did in 2017, lowering down the crash structure, which now runs across here, which means the air intake now sits above the crash structure. In previous years, the crash structure would sit quite high up with the air intake down below, and that high up crash structure would have determined the width of your air intake, the opening here. Now that the crash structure has been moved back down, we can push the side pod back, or the air intake further on the side pod back, and we can have the side pod opening whatever we need it or we want it to be. They've gone one of the slimmest, narrowest openings I've seen, and we've got this really unique shape of the side pod. Instead of having a really aggressive undercut that we see on most Formula One cars, actually it comes out, it's almost like an overcut. So we've got a very wide bottom of the side pod, kind of feathering and tailing off to a narrow, gradual phase up towards the engine cover. So that's also quite different, very unique, and I imagine that's allowed them to package some of the mechanical components inside much lower down than perhaps you would have done if you'd had to have them high up to in the normal sort of flared side pod with the undercut that we've seen before. With this narrow opening at the top of the side pod, you obviously have a very small target for that airflow to hit. And the cooling demands on a Formula One car are such that we need to get as much airflow in there as fast and as cleanly as possible. So that's where it comes back to what I was saying before about the suspension arrangement here and the barge board and this big fin that sits above the opening. All of this area around here, it's all about directing, controlling that airflow to this very small target area of the air intake above the side pod there. So if you've got a small area, you've got to direct it accurately, and that's what all of this whole concept is about directing the airflow to this air intake here, and also to the other crucial parts like getting it around towards the back of the car and the diffuser, and as I said before, cleaning up the front tyre wake. So that that is all something that's a slightly different take on what we've seen on the other cars. It's a common concept now. It's seemingly a common concept of having this lower crash structure. The side pods openings move back along the car behind the crash structure. That's what Ferrari did so successfully in 2017, and other teams are now taking that on board. Lots of detail around the edge of the floor, tyre squirt slots like we see quite commonly now. A very narrow Coke bottle area of the car, so the bit that feathers in, tapers in around the gearbox is incredibly narrow on this car. So the packaging is incredibly neat. It means that the airflow and the cooling properties have to be absolutely spot on to enable that power unit to keep cool in the varying conditions that we will have around the world. But one thing that I spotted here that seems to be quite different to most cars is the shut lines of the bodywork seem to run along here and down here, which says to me that this top section and what's left of the shark fin area of the car are open to change. They're going to have different options that the team can bolt on, and changeable options depending on perhaps the ambient conditions for cooling, depending on perhaps the different aerodynamic solutions they need for every single track. So that's not something I've seen before. Normally the shut line comes down here and around the side of the bodywork. The whole engine cover would change as one. Having this sort of modular effect where you've got this whole section which seemingly could be changed in itself seems like a new way of looking at things to me. As I said, absolutely got Adrian Newey written all over this. It's all about aero, and everything else has to fit in to Adrian Newey's vision of what the aerodynamics of this car should look like. They've again gone with a very high rake concept, high rake platform. So the back of the car very high up, the front of the car very low. That's been their concept for a number of years now that Red Bull have, I guess, pioneered and carried through and probably are leading the way with. Other teams are now starting to copy that, but that seems to continue with this model as well. And I think that's it. A single wing pillar, what seems to have like a sort of wide mount that sits over the exhaust, but a single pillar. We saw the Williams have a twin pillar. Really, there's no major advantage or disadvantage, not massively anyway, but that's just something they've gone with. They think seems to work better in conjunction with the other aerodynamic pieces they've got on the car. Haven't really seen the back of the car yet, so I don't quite know what the diffuser looks like, but again, with the high rake that they run on this car, I'm imagining it's a very aggressive. That's why they run the high rake, to really open up the rear diffuser and improve the expansion rate of that diffuser, therefore creating more downforce, particularly through the corners. That's where this car has had to work hard over the last few years to make up time in the corners when they've been perhaps losing time on the fast sections, the straights, due to the power unit deficit they've been struggling with. So we all hope, as they will do, that Renault have made big gains in the power unit department, not only for Red Bull's sake, but we want McLaren to be up there. We want the Renault team as well to be in the mix. And only time will tell, of course, just how competitive this car would be. But how good would it be to see Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen fighting at the front with the Ferraris and the Mercedes in 2018? As I said, don't forget to like the video if you have liked it. Say a big thank you to Claire. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Turn your notifications on, because then you won't miss another thing. Please share it around. Tell everybody about it. Tell everybody what we're doing here. And I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.